Accessible Accessibility, presented by Josh Goldberg, AliCamp 2021. We'd like to thank our gold sponsors Telstra and Intopia, our silver sponsors ANZ and Coles, and our bronze sponsor How2.
Hello, and welcome to Accessible Accessibility with me, Josh Goldberg. I hope you are here because you want to make your team create accessible products. Maybe you're at some sort of organization that creates a product and you're not sure whether it's accessible. Maybe you've done nothing before and don't know where to start. Or maybe you do some accessibility stuff, but you're not sure if it's enough. Either way, I'm hopeful that this presentation will give you the tips, tricks, and general strategies that you need to turn your team from inaccessible to very accessible. For that, the agenda is threefold. To start, I want to talk to you about motivations. How do you understand what the people around you want? And especially in the context of convincing them to help with accessibility, how do you understand how to motivate them for your goals? After that, we'll talk about processes, how to build accessibility into your team charter to make sure that not only do people not forget to do accessibility, but that they are not just ready, but enthusiastic to do it well. And lastly, we'll talk about design systems, one of my favorite things in all of engineering and design that helps both minimize cost and maximize output quality, consistency, such as with accessibility. A little bit about me first. Hello, I'm Josh. I'm a front-end developer on the web platform team at Codecademy, which I think is the best free way to learn how to code. I work on shared tooling across a lot of our front-end apps, things like React and TypeScript for those who enjoy those terms. I started and led the Codecademy Accessibility Initiative from 2019 all the way through mid-2021. And I'm writing an O'Reilly book on TypeScript on the side. So chat me up if that's of interest to you. Everything in this presentation is referenced in slide annotations. All images should have descriptive text. And you can see the slides on my website at joshuakgoldberg.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Joshua K. Goldberg. And you can contact the accessibility team with the email accessibility@codecademy.com. If you have any bug reports, that would be lovely. We'd love to give you free pro as thanks for your time. Anyway, let's talk motivations. You need to understand, how do you speak to the needs of those around you? To start, ask yourself this question. What motivates my coworkers to take the actions they choose? Why does a particular project manager fund some projects, invest in some features or tech debt, and not others? Are they motivated by a particular segment of users? Have they been griped at by engineers that some tech debt is particularly bad in an area? Do they feel like the product needs higher quality for bug fixes or to focus on features instead? Once you understand that, how can you fit your actions, the things you want taken, in with those motivations? If, say, you want to make a higher quality product, maybe you should talk to a project manager who's been focusing on an area of the product you think is particularly poor. Or maybe if that project manager wants to create a higher quality product, you can tell them about how accessibility helps make product quality higher. Now, there are a lot of reasons why accessibility is great and important. I have found that the three most convincing ones are in order from most important to slightly less important, but still important: moral, legal, and business. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can fit these into common motivations of your coworkers. To start, morality, accessibility is the right thing to do. By far and away, this is, I think, the most important one. Not being accessible unfairly blocks your product from being used by some users, by definition. Those users could be anyone. They could be someone who is blind or print disabled for a product that doesn't have good color contrast or alt text and images. It could be that a power user can't tab through the page well because you mucked up your focus states. And in general, I think something that should be really key to remember here is that people generally don't choose to need an accessibility feature. Someone who has, say, ADHD like myself doesn't choose to be unable to concentrate on a page if there's anything flashing or animating. That's not a choice. That's a need. I need your page to calm down and stop looping. And in other cases, people generally just want a better quality website. And in case it's not obvious, this is my personal favorite reason why one should be accessible. From the legal perspective, if the morality doesn't convince someone, please note that the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, along with many equivalents in other countries, such as this conference's Great Australia, prohibits discrimination based on ability. Domino's got sued because if you were blind, you just couldn't use their website to order pizza. It just didn't work. And that's a form of discrimination based on ability. Trust me when I say you don't want to get sued. And just in general, let's go back to the moral side. There are laws around disabilities and discrimination for a reason. It is a horrible thing to break this law. Please don't do it. And lastly, of the top three, business reasons. Money. Stop restricting your users if you want their money. Plain and simple. But slightly more professionally, many organizations won't purchase your products if you're B2B, aka business to business, if you're not accessible, per the legal point. Many, say, education and government institutes have laws or internal rules that require them to only use products and services that are accessible. That's, for many of them, just hands down a need, not a nice to have. And yes, personally, I think it should upset us that the moral reasons aren't enough for everyone, but people have different motivations. A CEO of a company that's losing money and needs to pay back its investors, and a hot new startup that's trying to find product market fit, although they might care personally about accessibility, it might not be top of mind for them. They might be more worried about, say, going out of business. I personally think they should still be accessible, but that's just me. Now, I should also note that a lot of people, hopefully many of you in this conference, are like me and kind of get a little ugh when someone says you should be accessible because it's legally required. Do we only do things because they're legally required? Is morality not important? So when you're trying to convince someone, I recommend trying to understand what speaks to them, and by default, maybe consider starting with it's the right thing to do. But that's just me. The world we live in, unfortunately, does not always reward it's the right thing to do. Especially for products and businesses, paying people for goods and services, the type of world we live in is capitalism. People are incentivized by money. So if you're talking to someone in a business, remember where they're coming from, even if, like me, you might not like or agree with it. Summarizing that pro tip, order your arguments by what will be the most effective. Taking the meme of Drake from before, this crudely drawn suit is trying to imply Jake is a business person. He's saying things that make him less effective at work are things that might not be received well. But since he's a business person, he understands that you should be accessible because we're legally required and it will make more money. So it can be difficult to explain accessibility to many different folks. If you're talking to a large group of people, I find it can be difficult to explain it in the way that speaks to all of them at once without, say, turning away people who think you should care about morals more than some others, or people who care primarily about the legal or monetary requirements. So as a general tip, I like this phrasing. There are many reasons, there are several reasons why you should become accessible, primarily moral, legal, and business. For this context, I'll focus on, and then you choose, who are you talking to? What motivates them? How are they positioned in your organization? Hone in on that and explain that to them. Good. Thumbs up. So to recap, people are motivated by different things. Talk to them, figure out what motivates them, and then use that to inform how you try to explain and convince accessibility to them. Once you've gotten everyone convinced, yay accessibility, let's talk about processes. How do you make it increasingly difficult for your team to ship inaccessible products? As a general rule, the things I'm going to tell you about fall under the theme of ramping up your team's enthusiasm and knowledge over time. Keep in mind that although you may be an accessibility expert, you may be familiar with it, you may care, not everyone is coming from a place of pure and 100% understanding. Many people want to care, do care, but don't really understand accessibility. It can be a hard subject to learn. Every subject can be hard to learn if you haven't done it yet. So instead of expecting your team to be 100% accessibility gurus and experts, remember that they're coming from various places and try to build them up, work with them, meet them where they are, and help them ramp up in both enthusiasm and knowledge for accessibility over time. Train them. I'll go into each of these one by one in a little more detail, but as a general rule, these are the 7 main strategies I like to use when convincing someone and then helping them become accessibility experts. To start, documentation and presentations are great. Basic pieces of information stored in some internal company or group storage. Checklists are a way to build accessibility into your process to make sure that things get respected. You remember to say, do a bug bash before release. Static and dynamic analysis are fantastic ways to execute some form of checkers on your code to make sure things are going well. Real user tests, the only way to actually be accessible, to talk to people who understand it well. And pairings, getting team members to work with each other. Again, I'm just going to go over these one by one in a little more detail. Let's start with documentation. First, you got to learn what your team needs to do. What does your team need to learn? What are the process changes it needs to make? And how will it make the product accessible? Once you understand that, write the documentation that you would have wanted to understand those things. Docs are very important, especially for a developer like me. We always need good documentation, explanation of how to do things. So when you're writing documentation in your team, whether it's Dropbox Paper or Notion or Word or whatever, figure out the reading journeys for your onboardings, which take people from less to more, and style guides, which hone people in doing the right thing more prescriptively. If someone has never worked in accessibility before and they're a designer, explain to them what visual design means for accessibility, good color contrast, understanding focus states. Don't use carousels. If someone's a developer, explain things like, again, focus states, using the tools, the checkers, the analysis we'll go into later. How to use, again, we'll go into this later, the design system to write things well with minimal effort. And once people are ramped up, give them style guides that say, a little more prescriptively, this is the right way to do stuff. Use this button there, use that color here. A little more specific to teams, set up internal docs for team-specific scenarios. If an engineer is working on a new feature, set up documentation for how they can add the tests they need to make sure the feature is accessible. For designers, say, give them guidelines for acceptable color contrast scenarios, types of animations that are or are not in brand and accessible. Lastly, link out to external docs for deep dives and explanations. You are not going to be able to document every fine detail of everything in your documentation set. There's just too much information out there. You're also not an expert on everything. No one is. So for things that you can't be the penultimate source of truth on, common tooling and stuff across the industry, link out to the experts. It's good not just because you get the right information in front of your learners, your peers, and yourself, but also because it's good to train people on who are the experts for particular areas and how can they use those experts to gain knowledge. In this case, you use those experts to gain knowledge by reading the documentation online. Giving a screenshot of the Notion page for accessibility at Codecademy, the bottom half of which is blurred out, We have a whole bunch of further resources. Our Slack channel, our accessibility brown bag, which is what we call a presentation. We have a whole bunch of definitions, standards, processes, tools, and more. But this root accessibility page that we have in our Notion primarily speaks to a few topics that are very basic and foundational. For us, what is accessibility? How do we define it? What do or do not fall into that scope? How accessible are we? On a scale of A, which is must have, to AAA, which is nice to have. By the way, we strive for AA, shout outs. What does accessibility mean for particular product areas, for particular roles? The point here is we have a very basic root page that then links out to pages or external docs with more info. We also have, as mentioned, a dedicated Slack channel, #accessibility, which has a couple of pinned posts, things like our useful accessibility links, our GitHub groups for engineers to request review from, Jira roadmaps and boards, Jira, our monthly ticket triage for our rotating accessibility tests that we'll go over later. Again, the main content of this is blurred out. Having pinned posts, by the way, in a Slack channel is something I found to be a very effective way of launching people into the more detailed documentation. When someone doesn't know what to do, they'll find either your root documentation page in whatever system you have, such as Notion, or they'll go on Slack and ask there. And having just one nice pinned post to give them makes it a lot easier to onboard people. Speaking of onboarding, let's talk about presentations. My general tip for these is to go shallow first, deep later, and build hype either way. What I mean by that is, when you're taking someone who might not come from a place of high expertise and knowledge, you want to go shallow, give them the foundations first, much like in the Notion document I showed, and then give more deep explanations later, also like those documentations. And the whole way, you want to build the hype. You want to get them excited about it. This isn't just something they should do because of whatever moral, business, legal reasons. It's not just something they're being asked to do. It's something they want to do. Something that's good, that'll do the right thing for learners, for users, that'll make the company money, that'll stop you from being sued. This is the good stuff. This is what you want. You want to share that enthusiasm, that hype. So for your presentations, again, start off introducing main motivations. Why are you going to be accessible? How does accessibility affect you? What does it mean to be accessible? And then, for your targeted groups, such as designers, developers, product managers, marketers, hold deep dives that give information specific to them. For designers, at Codecademy, we focused on the visual changes, things like good focus states, color contrast that isn't too non-differentiated. Animations. Why can't you have looping or auto-dismissed things? Why are carousels almost never okay? For developers, we focused on the technical implementation of those designs. What does it mean to create a button? What's the difference between a button and a link? How do you make a form? How do you update a form? How do you run tests or schedule user tests? For our marketers, we talked a lot about, in their specific onboarding and presentations, how do you describe accessibility? How do you say things in a way that isn't ableist, sexist, racist, homophobic, any of those? How do you describe being accessible without implying that it's purely for people who are less than, who have disabilities that make them worse, which is something that is very easy to accidentally imply if you're not being careful. You very much don't want to do that. That's horrible. Once you have all these presentations and onboardings, put them in your documentation. Record the presentations for those who don't have the ability to be there at that time. Put annotations the way I have in this one so that people who can't or don't want to see an onboarding in real time can read. And then make sure they're linked in the documentation. You want your, and this is finally me saying the title of the talk in the talk, you want your accessibility to be accessible. You want to make sure that however someone in your team is going to join on, whether it's through documentation or presentations or what, they feel like they have a way to do it. As a corollary, make sure giving a presentation, taking the lead on accessibility, is itself also accessible. It's okay to not know everything. I don't know everything. I'm not an expert. There are people on the accessibility team who know much more than me on the actual making of accessibility. Shout out Jasmine. There are people who know much better than me how to motivate others and are now leading the team. Shout out Katie. It's not okay to stop yourself from taking a lead on something because you think, without strong evidence, that you don't know enough. My understanding, what I have seen, is that people almost always can get themselves to learn the thing if they feel like they're ready for it. If you already knew everything you were doing in a particular area, you wouldn't be learning at all. And that's bad. You want to be learning day to day. Moving on, checklists. You want to make accessibility a core part of your team processes. And oftentimes, I found the easiest way to do that is with checklists. For those who haven't used them before, a checklist is a set of steps, things that you check off as you do them, and they're fantastic for standardizing processes in an organization. For example, doctors, surgeons will use them to make sure that, say, they've checked with the nurses about which limb they're doing surgery on. They'll wash their hands, they'll whatever they do. They have to do it in order, and they make sure with an actual checklist that they'll do it. An example of a checklist you might use on a product team is reserving time for accessibility fixes and bug bashes in the feature release checklist that you're using to ship product. Add accessibility to whatever release checklist you're already using. If you have a checklist for how to set up a new project, maybe it involves reserving time for a bug bash, setting up a ticket or issue tracking board in Jira or whatever you're using. Make sure that adding time for specific accessibility fixes and checks is on there. Side note, if you don't have release checklists yet in your processes, highly recommend. You would be surprised at what gets dropped constantly with projects because there's no single checklist tracking them. As an engineer, I have the distinct pleasure of constantly finding dead code that people forgot to clean up 3 years prior to me joining the company. Please don't do that to me or my peers. Use a checklist. Another Notion screen cap. The accessibility feature release checklist at Codecademy. You can see just the top part here. It has the lovely note that I'm very proud of. Product teams are required to complete the steps in this checklist before releasing any new feature. You can only see the first 3 on this list. I promise there are more than this. But to start, you must run an accessibility audit before Test.io, which is the service we use to get accessibility testers on the product. You must ensure pages run Axe in an end-to-end test, which is a tool I'll talk more about later that runs automated testing. And before you release to any fixed percentage of users, you have to fix, in addition to a few others, at the very least, all fixes for single A level, meaning must fix accessibility bugs from the audit. That's before it releases to any users. And I guarantee you, if you're not using a checklist such as this one, your team is almost certainly forgetting to do this. Highly recommend. Moving on, static analysis. My personal professional top interest, tools that scan your code for issues without running it. It takes a look and it yells at you about things it doesn't like. Isn't that joyous? One common example of static analysis is a linter. In JavaScript land, the common linter is ESLint. It takes a look at JavaScript code, which is the type of code you use to create a web page, and it detects accessibility or other issues automatically. It can't catch everything, it won't catch even a majority of things, but it does catch some stuff. And it is a very good way to train devs to refer to docs. Oftentimes, the ESLint plugin that's best for accessibility in common libraries such as React will have really good links to issues or documentation pages or docs in general that describe why a complaint was being logged. For example, let's take a little bit of code diving for a sec. This is React code. You don't have to read or understand how it works, but you can generally see on the second line that it's creating an image, IMG, with a source of some image. And the accessibility engineers and many other folks in the audience are already cringing in pain because this thing doesn't have alt text, meaning it doesn't have a description of what is the image. So screen readers, Google's search bots, people who generally want to know what's in the image without looking at it, no idea what this image is. So the accessibility complaints might get logged by the static analysis tool that, hey, if you have an image element, it must have an alt prop, either with meaningful text or an empty string indicating it's decorative. And if you use the JSX accessibility or the React accessibility tooling for ESLint, it will link you for this particular complaint to a very nice, mostly blurred in this image, alt text description page that explains why you're getting that complaint and common ways to resolve it. All this is to say, ESLint and other static analysis tools are a great way of quickly getting feedback on your code and getting documentation about how to fix it. But that's just looking at your code without running it. End-to-end tests are a form of dynamic analysis. They run your code, they create a version of your web page, and then they check it. So they still don't catch all issues, perhaps not even a majority, but they can catch much more. And my favorite end-to-end test tool is something called Axe. I haven't checked the list of other presenters, but I'm sure at least one of them, perhaps a majority, are going to mention Axe at some point in time. It's a tool that scans the HTML and CSS, meaning the visuals and the styles, on all pages. It can run on any sort of web page. And I highly recommend integrate this into your engineering processes so that if someone introduces an Axe failure on a page in the end-to-end test, so the test that tests the full page, it blocks the build, meaning the engineer is not allowed to change code. They're not allowed to submit that code change until they fix the Axe failure. And that's great. In engineering land, we generally block builds on things that we consider to be what's called a blocker, something like code not running well, a bug, a test failing, and this is a test just like any other. Axe is fantastic also because it's very useful and can be embedded in a whole bunch of other places. I have resources at the end of this presentation that include a link to the browser extension. Here I have Accessibee's website, which is a much hated product that tries to make a website accessible automatically, and I ran Axe via the Chrome DevTools on it. And it found 271 issues, although to be fair, 197 of them it's not sure, but still, like, that's several dozen issues automatically on the page, ranging from elements not having sufficient color contrast, to videos not having captions, to headings being out of order or not semantically properly set up, which is really embarrassing for Accessibee. And actually brings me to a really good pro tip that accessibility overlays generally don't work, which is why I don't cover how to use them here. Putting it as politely as I feel comfortable, they're crap. Only real dedicated users, dedicated accessibility testers can show that your product is accessible. You have to run real user tests. You have to, for new users, for new features, require an accessibility audit and fixes for that audit before releasing to users. There are a few controversies recently where Twitter released a new feature and it was inaccessible. And sure, the number or the percentage of Twitter users who weren't able to use that feature might have been single-digit percents, but there are a lot of Twitter users, and therefore a lot of users who are affected. And going back to the morality thing, I just think that's wrong, like morally wrong to release something that some of your users can't use. So definitely, if you want to be accessible, which you should, release only after you've made sure with real users who know what they're doing, who can really check to make sure you're accessible once they give you the sign-off. I also recommend, because not everything is done in a big feature release, schedule a regular cycle of audits on existing pages in your site. We do this at Codecademy. We have a huge list of features, and every month we test some number of those features. I'm gesturing going down a list in chunks, so that we get little bugs that have creeped in reported to us. And then once a bug is filed either from an audit or from a new feature test, triage it to the proper product team that should own it. It's nice to have a dedicated accessibility team, but accessibility is a shared responsibility, like code quality. And it's really good to have the teams that own an area understand how to fix accessibility issues in that area. Here's a quick screen cap. I've blurred out people's names, but this is a list of teams that's a little out of date from Codecademy, along with their JIRA label, so that if you see a bug in a particular area, you know how to triage it to a particular team. We've actually set up interactive tools where you can do Q&A, question and answers, to figure out which team owns a particular bug. So in summary for that part, work with your teammates to integrate accessibility into their team's processes. And really, I can't emphasize this enough. Get accessibility feedback from real users, people who actually use the website or who are trained as experts in using your website in various usage forms. No keyboard, no mouse, no monitor, etc. Unless you yourself know accessibility, you don't. You're not going to be able to guarantee it works, so get the experts. One quick tip, by the way, about real users is that you want to compensate them very generously for their time and effort. If someone is taking time out of their day to go through your website and explain to you in detail all the ways that I should and could do better, you should be very grateful for their generosity. It is a chore to go through the web and have to constantly explain to websites, to services, to people why things are bad. It's demoralizing and it's a pain in the butt. At Codecademy, we give people a whole bunch of free Pro, our subscription product, as thanks whenever they meaningfully contribute to the accessibility effort, because we are grateful to them for taking time out of their day for us. And if you're doing the same thing, if you're asking people for bug fixes or reports, if you're asking people how you can make it better for them, it's great, but you also want to make sure you're not leeching off of the people you're trying to help. So compensate users for their time and effort generously. Back to team process stuff, pairings. I highly recommend take on pairings. If you are on an accessibility team, whether it's just you, full-time or part-time, or a whole bunch of people, full-time or part-time, you don't want the accessibility team to be the only person or group of people in the company who know accessibility. You don't want to silo your knowledge. You want to distribute it around all the people who might benefit from it. So pairings, whether it's one-on-one, two people tackling a bug or feature, or some kind of small group, maybe a mob session as they're called, when one person does and everyone else cheers and looks on. Whatever form of knowledge sharing in real time or asynchronously, such as over Slack, highly recommend you try to do it as much as possible with Slack, with Zoom, with whatever tools you have. For accessibility issues, it's fantastic when you can get other teams to work with you so that you can share knowledge. You can help them understand more about accessibility, or vice versa, oftentimes, and they can help you understand how their team does things, how they particularly work, how their features are set up. Knowledge sharing is good, and you want as much of it as possible. One area that I have found to be particularly good for knowledge sharing on is design systems. Design systems are things that codify the structure behind your user-facing product. Or in other words, they are a collection of reusable components, where a component could be a button, a particular set of colors, spacing, padding, a heading form. Anything that you share across multiple areas in your app, colors, color combos, focus states, forums, icons, inputs, text sizes, all that stuff. Put it in a shared collection so that people can import it once and not have to rewrite it themselves constantly. I don't know about you, but I prefer not to redo work that's already been done before. Taking a look at a quick screenshot of Codecademy.com for a logged-in user, this is their user dashboard or learner dashboard. Mine, just saying what's on the screen, has a My Courses section and a My Goals section, each of which has a heading and an edit button. I'm taking a Learn TypeScript course, Woo TypeScript. I'm 18% of the way through. There's also a heading on top of the page. There's a lot of stuff in this particular screenshot that is pulled from our design system. Shout out to the team that built this, the engagement team. For starters, there are a whole bunch of shared colors. We have all sorts of different pages that use a surprisingly small palette of colors. This one only has 7: white, gray, black, gold, beige, yellow, hyper, which is our bluish, indigo-ish color. If someone wants a purple button, they'll use hyper. They're not going to make a new color. They're not going to have to go through the effort of checking, is this color contrast accessible for white or black as text as a background. We know this color works. We know white is allowed on this color, so we use it. Going through a whole bunch of other stuff on this page that's pulled from the design system. We have different types of text: menu text, H2, heading 2, H3, caption, body text. These are standard. They're used in Codecademy. We know that with these particular colors that this font size is accessible and it matches the rest of the design system, which is another great example, by the way, of the design system, or generally anything that helps with accessibility, just being a good idea in general. We have a particular set of buttons. This page has 5-6 different buttons on it, but only 2 types of buttons. A text button, which is just text, and a fill button, which adds in a background. These are, predictably, also designed in the design system and implemented once in a shared location, so that people using them know it visually matches up. Things like focus states and triggers for accessibility work well. We have a set of icons: iconography, search, bell, article, quiz, and so on, which have good semantics around alt text. We have a couple of logos visible on the screen. Top header, there's a little pro indicator on some career path. These logos are standardized. We have a slightly more complicated progress bar components, which shows me at 18% using a nice little pattern background and the gold color bar on top of it. We have a hex character. Anyway, we have a whole bunch of stuff. Create components once and put them in the design system. I really can't emphasize enough how much better it is as a developer and as a designer to be able to work with a design system when things are already made for you, when you don't have to constantly reinvent everything. If you're curious, by the way, the Codecademy design system is called Gamut. It's open source, meaning anybody can look at the code. We do have some private links to private Figma docs there, but the website is gamut.codecademy.com. I'll have a link at the end, and there's one in the slide annotation here. It's got all sorts of documentation. It's arranged in a system called Atomic Design. We have things like atoms, logo, button, layouts like our layout grid, all sorts of cool stuff. I really like Gamut. As an example of how Gamut is useful, and design systems in general, we build the documentation site with a tool called Storybook. Storybook lets you make these really nice interactive pages that show source code, how a developer might use a component, and an interactive playground along with it. On this page, we have the CTA button, call to action button, with a little bit of source code. It's 7 or 8 lines of code that creates a button. Beautiful. Being able to make these shared components available and easily usable by your designers and developers calls in a saying called the pit of success. Make doing it right easy and doing it wrong difficult. So let's recap here. What have we talked about today? To start, speak to your peers' motivations, moral, business, and/or legal. Set up team processes and informative automated tooling, ESLint, Axe, all that stuff, release checklists. And reduce duplicate work using a user-tested design system. For a few non-technical resources, the book How to Win Friends and Influence People is a little controversial, and I'm always hesitant to recommend it because Dale Carnegie was a real weird, in ways, negative person, and there are legitimate criticisms of how the book kind of makes people manipulative. Also, it's just like an old book, but it's helped me and a lot of people understand how to effectively communicate and forge friendships and bonds with others, so I still do recommend it. For a more modern book that's excellent about understanding how to talk to people to really understand where they're coming from, even if you don't understand and think they're wrong at first, Nonviolent Communication is fantastic, NVC. Couple more resources. Overlayfactsheet.com explains why overlays such as Accessibility are not good enough, and Test.io is the service we use for dedicated user testing. I'll note that if you have any other accessibility service recommendations, especially for getting TAAS, Testers as a Service, I would love to hear them. There's just so few of them in the industry I've heard of. For some non-technical resources, for some technical resources, ESLint, eslint.org, and then the accessibility or Ally plugin is on NPM, the package manager for JavaScript. Axe is on deque.com. They have a browser extensions page for it. And our very snazzy design system, Gamut, is on gamut.codecademy.com. My stuff, again, Joshua K. Goldberg on Twitter and joshuakgoldberg.com, which includes a link to the slides, which have annotations and more references. And if you have anything to say about accessibility at Codecademy, including and especially bug reports, feature requests, that type of stuff, we'd love to compensate you for your time with Free Pro, accessibility@codecademy.com. Thanks, everyone, and I hope you have an excellent accessibility camp. Bye.
AliCamp 2021